that the prosecution of Donald Trump in New York, one of the main guys was a Department of Justice official in the Biden administration who jumped ship to join a local prosecutor's office to go after Donald Trump.
And yet, well, Senator, that happens all the time. People are appointed from Washington.
Kristen, it happens.
Hold on, Senator,
are you really saying, Kristen,
Senator, let me finish my
it happens
sentence,
all the
then I'll let
time
you finish.
that the number 3 person in the Department of Justice jumps ship to join a local prosecutor's office to go after the president's political opponent? I don't think that's ever happened.
Guys, in this video, we have J.D. Vance completely destroying Meet the Press's Kristen Welker. Let's get into the video. I'll give you my thoughts on the back end.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. I want to talk to you about the immunity ruling and the implications. This is what Donald Trump said last year about wanting to target his political opponents. Take a listen.
I will appoint a real special prosecutor to go after the most corrupt president in the history of the United States of America, Joe Biden, and the entire Biden crime family.
Senator, if former President Trump were to win, if you were to be his vice president, would you support him appointing a special prosecutor to go after his political enemies, the Bidens?
Well, first of all, Kristen, I find it interesting how much the media and the Democrats have lost their mind over this particular quote. Donald Trump is talking about appointing a special prosecutor to investigate Joe Biden for wrongdoing. Joe Biden has done exactly that for the last few years and has done far more in addition to that to engage in a campaign of lawfare against his political opposition. I think what Donald Trump is simply saying is we ought to investigate the prior administration. There are obviously many instances of wrongdoing. The House Oversight Committee has identified a number of corrupt business transactions that may or may not be criminal. Of course, you have to investigate to find out. So I think Donald Trump saying, look, let's do the basic work of investigating wrongdoing is a totally reasonable thing for him to do. And frankly, the Biden administration has done far worse. So if you think that what Donald Trump is proposing is a threat to democracy, isn't what Biden has already done a massive threat to our system of law and government?
Senator, just to be very clear, though, Joe Biden didn't appoint a special prosecutor. The Attorney General did that. Trump was indicted by grand juries. He was found guilty by a jury of his peers in New York. But can we just go back to the core question here? Would you support him taking such an action? It sounds like you're saying, yes, you would.
I would absolutely support investigating prior wrongdoing by our government. Absolutely. That's what you have to have in a system of law and order, Kristen. But I have to reject the premise here. Joe Biden appointed the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, who, of course, answers to Joe Biden, can be fired by Joe Biden. So the idea that the Biden administration has nothing to do with the appointment of the special prosecutor, I think, completely betrays a misunderstanding of how our system of government actually works. And of course, Kristen, we have to make this point, Kristen, that the prosecution of Donald Trump in New York, which I think now is fundamentally been thrown in doubt by this immunity case, it was one of the main guys was a Department of Justice official in the Biden administration who jumped ship to join a local prosecutor's office to go after Donald Trump.
And yet the DOJ
if that
told
doesn't make you question the legitimacy of the prosecution, that's a problem.
Well, Senator, that happens all the time. People are appointed from Washington, but the DOJ told Congress, testified this week
Kristen,
that it reviewed
it happens.
Hold on, Senator,
are you really saying, Kristen?
Senator, let me finish my sentence, then I'll let you finish. Hold on.
The number.
Let me just finish this. The DOJ told Congress this week it reviewed all communications since Biden took office and found no contact between federal prosecutors and those involved with that case in New York. Can you stick to the substance of the question, though? Let me just ask, because I just want to stick with this line of theory that you are laying out, which is you are saying it's not okay for Joe Biden to weaponize the Justice Department. If it's not okay for Joe Biden to weaponize the Justice Department, as you say, which there's no evidence of that, why is it okay for Donald Trump to do that?
Well, Kristen, first of all, you said that it happens all the time, that the number 3 person in the Department of Justice jumps ship to join a local prosecutor's office to go after the president's political opponent. I don't think that's ever happened in the history of American democracy, and I don't think that we should legitimize it. Now, if Donald Trump's Attorney General had his number 2 or his number 3 jump ship to a local prosecutor's office in Ohio or Wisconsin, and that person then went after Donald Trump's political opposition, that's a different conversation.
Senator,
all he's suggesting is that we should investigate credible arguments of wrongdoing. That's all that Donald Trump is saying. That is not a threat to democracy. That's merely reinforcing our system of law and government.
Bottom line, you are okay with Donald Trump appointing a special prosecutor to go after his political enemies, which would include Joe Biden. You're just, to button that up, it sounds like you're saying yes. Let me move on, though, to my next question. I want to talk to you about the Heritage Foundation. It's a conservative think tank in Washington. It shapes the agenda they would like to see in a Trump second term. The president said this after the Supreme Court's ruling this week. Take a look.
We're in the process of taking this country back. No one in the audience should be despairing. No one should be discouraged. We ought to be really encouraged by what happened yesterday. We are in the process of the Second American Revolution, which will remain bloodless if the left allows it to be.
Do you support those calls for a revolution, and would political violence ever be justified?
Well, of course, political violence is never justified, Kristen. You'll have to ask the president of the Heritage Foundation to defend his remarks if you'd like to do that. I will say, look, the Heritage Foundation does a lot of good work. It does a lot of things that I disagree with, a lot of things that I agree with. But the Heritage Foundation is a nonprofit organization that works on public policy, and I think it's an important part of how D.C. functions and operates. We'll continue to have important conversations in the Republican Party with a whole host of think tanks from the right and from the left as we craft public policy. That's the way the city works. And again, I'm not going to be the person who serves as a spokesperson for the Heritage Foundation. I don't have any affiliation.
Sounds like you're distancing yourself from those comments that talk of political violence.
Look, Kristen, I certainly don't think political violence is justified. That's certainly actually not what I think that Kevin Roberts was saying to begin with. But again, have him on your program to defend what he said, and I think that's the best thing to do.
Let me ask you specifically about Project 2025 for our viewers so that they know. It's basically a policy blueprint for a second Trump presidency. It's supported by the Heritage Foundation and other conservative groups. The Biden campaign has said Project 25, quote, should scare every single American. It would give Trump limitless power over our daily lives. Among the things they are calling for is reversing approval of the abortion pill, mifepristone. But Donald Trump says he supports access to that pill, actually. Do you support access to abortion medication as Donald Trump does?
Well, Kristen, you asked about Project 2025, and I want to be clear here. That Trump explicitly has said his own transition team runs the Trump transition and will run the Trump administration. Again, you have a whole host of organizations, some of which have good ideas, some of which have bad ideas, and some of which have both. And I'm sure the Trump administration will talk to a lot of people as it's crafting an agenda to bring back American manufacturing jobs, to lower inflation, and to bring peace and prosperity back to the world. That's the whole reason why me and so many others are trying to reelect Donald Trump, is because the agenda actually worked. It was his agenda, and I think it'll work again for the American people. On the question of the abortion pill, what so many of us have said is that, look, we certainly don't. The Supreme Court made a decision saying that the American people should have access to that medication. Donald Trump has supported that opinion. I support that opinion. I think it's important to say that we actually have to have an important conversation in this country about what our abortion policy should be. Donald Trump is the pragmatic leader here. He's saying most abortion policy is going to be decided by the states. We want to make it easier and more affordable for young women and parents to have families to begin with. We want to lower housing costs, eliminate those surprise medical bills that so many families see after they have a baby. That's the Trump and Republican approach to this issue. Meanwhile, Joe Biden wants taxpayer-funded abortion up to the moment of birth. It's so crazy to me how the Democrats frame this as Republicans. Just let me finish, Kristen. They frame Democrats as being reasonable and pragmatic, when in reality, Republicans are the one trying to find some common ground here.
As you know, very few abortions take place later in pregnancy, and almost always because there is a medical emergency. I know Trump is trying to distance himself from Project 2025, but we have to point out that a number of people who are involved with it are former Trump officials: Ben Carson, Peter Navarro, Russ Vought, and others. But just to be clear, you support mifepristone being accessible?
Yes, Kristen, I do. But again, on the Project 2025 issue, what the media and the Democrats are trying to do is attach its most unpopular elements to the Trump administration. It's a 900-page document. I guarantee there are things that Trump likes and dislikes about that 900-page document, but he is the person who will determine the agenda of the next administration. All he said very explicitly is, I am in charge of the next administration because I'm the person running for president. It's just important to make that clarification.
All these leftist media news anchors, can you let the people finish their answer if you're going to ask them a question? Now, for her to say that this happens all the time when she was talking about this New York district attorney prosecuting Trump, this never happens. Trump was found guilty on 34 felony counts while rerunning for election because, in my opinion, that was his actual crime, right? Running for re-election. It's the one and only reason that this case was ever brought up. They prosecuted the man for trying to be president again. That's the actual reality. That's the real crime here, which isn't even a crime. But you might be wondering, if you're not familiar with this, a lot of my listeners that are in Europe, if you're listening to this, what was Trump actually convicted of? Even after he was convicted on those 34 felony counts, no one can actually tell you what the crime was. One possible theory is actually that the government of New York really doesn't like it when you overpay your taxes, because that's the only thing that you can actually prove. If we're still going to pretend that this was a legitimate trial, in order to convict Donald Trump, it was not enough to show that he had supposedly falsified a business record. The government also had to show that Trump had falsified those records in furtherance of some other crimes. But what was the other crime? If you go back and look at this bogus nonsense, during the closing arguments, prosecutor Joshua Steinglass offered a theory. He said that Trump had falsified business records in order to violate a different New York state law that prohibited the use of unlawful means to promote any candidate for office. But that still leaves a question unanswered, right? What were those unlawful means that Trump supposedly engaged in? You see how ridiculous this gets. So you can keep peeling back the onion, but nobody can still tell you what the crime was. You still continue to come up empty. And prosecutor Steinglass never actually said what the unlawful means were, but he did mention a few possibilities, and one of those possibilities was that Trump violated a New York tax law. Now, when you hear that, when you hear somebody violated a New York tax law, you think, wow, okay, that guy must be engaging in tax evasion. That must be what they're alleging. But they were not accusing Donald Trump of tax evasion. Specifically, Steinglass argued that Trump's 1099 form was inaccurate because the payment to Michael Cohen was actually a reimbursement and not a compensation, as the Trump organization had reported. But if that were the case, you can see I'm a numbers guy, then the government, under its own theory of how Trump's team should have filed the paperwork, would be getting less money out of the deal because they're not owed income tax on reimbursement. They're only owed income tax on compensations. Now, I went through these crazy transcripts and found a quote from the prosecutor, because when I heard it, I couldn't actually believe it, so I found the actual quote. Here's the quote. This is what he told the jury. It's true that the result of the improper accounting is that the taxes would have to be paid that weren't owed. You don't have to pay taxes on a reimbursement. So the results of reporting them as income tax is that taxes are actually getting paid that are not owed. As the judge would have told you, in those cases, it's a crime to prepare false tax documents regardless, even if when doing so does not result in you underpaying your taxes, but overpaying your taxes. Let me repeat that. It's a crime to prepare false tax documents, even if when doing so does not result in you underpaying taxes. It's very possible that the jury could have convicted Donald Trump for falsifying business records in order to cover up the fact that he overpaid on his taxes. And you're going to tell me that this is something legit that happens all the time. This is villainous behavior, and we're supposed to just believe that that was a threat to our democracy, that it justifies potentially imprisoning a political opponent, a man who at that time was leading in every major poll across the country. And also, just for good measure, if the jury didn't buy the theory that the government and the judge gave them, they had a whole menu of other options that they could choose from. One of them was related to covering up a violation of campaign finance. Another was a violation of business record laws. And as I think it was Tablet Magazine put it, the jury could have found that Trump falsified business records to conspire to steal an election. That was another theory. So which one of these circular, incoherent conspiracies did the jury actually buy? Who knows? The judge didn't require them to make the decision unanimously. Each juror could have picked a different crime to convict Trump of committing. We may never know. So this was a former president who was leading every presidential candidate, and he was convicted of 34 felony charges by a jury of his political opponents during an election year based on a novel legal theory where the underlying alleged crime was never clearly explained and might not even make sense. You had 12 members of a jury that are walking out of a trial with potentially 12 different opposing ideas about what the crimes was, and they just convicted a former president of committing them. Trials like this are what define the third world. Alvin Bragg ran for office on the platform of going after Trump, and he managed to come up with this Frankenstein fake crime, the sole purpose of fulfilling that campaign promise. And if someone like this lady doesn't believe that the Biden DOJ had anything to do with the case, why was Matthew Colangelo, this guy that J.D. Vance mentions in this video, this third-ranking member of the Biden DOJ, you're going to try to tell me that he left that job in 2022 to work as a senior counsel with Alvin Bragg in a Manhattan DA office? He was the number 3 guy in the DOJ. This guy just decided to take a massive demotion to work in a smaller local prosecutor's office? Why would anybody do that? He must just be that impartial about enforcing bookkeeping laws in Manhattan. That whole thing was a joke, and people like her on the left just can't admit it. Hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, please smash that thumbs up button. Consider subscribing to the channel, help it grow, and I'll catch you all in the next video. Peace out, everybody.